Hello and welcome back to Prompt Circle, where we look at AI use cases through hands-on practical tutorials. In today's video, we're going to be looking at how to create a Notion knowledge base chatbot for your Slack application. We will build a Slack chatbot that can provide answers to questions based on information from a Notion page via API. Now, one thing you notice is that in previous tutorials, we've looked at how to chat with a PDF file or other forms of documents, and we've looked at how to use, embeddings to do this. But what if you don't really want to upload and re-upload documents all the time? How do we access information when it is dynamic and constantly changing? So this application is going to show you how, using Notion as an example. All right, so let's see our application in action. So here I am inside a Notion document, and inside this Notion document, I have information about my course. Now, as you can see right here, we're going to just basically query this from Slack, and just as usual with any other document. So let's say we're just asking the question, list out the uses of large language models. So this is going to be based on the information that is inside my document, and as you can see, it's going to go ahead and work on it, and it's going to return information directly from Notion. Now, just keep an eye on this. So we have 7 items that is returned, which is quite the same as what I have here. Now, the important thing to know that there is nothing new about this. So typically we do this with PDF type applications, and you've seen a lot of videos where I've done that, and you can check in the description, or I'm going to put it somewhere on the video so you can see videos that allow you to chat with your PDF files and things of that nature. That is fine. But what if you're dealing with a document that changes very frequently, that needs to be dynamic? This is why using an API type connection is much better than using just a PDF file. So in this instance, I'm just going to add one more item to my list, to this list. I'm going to say, let's say it's going to be about using AI, using large language models for research. So it enables the research process, helping with literature reviews and other document processing intensive tasks. Okay, so let's say that that's something I have added newly. So now when I ask that same question, I don't expect to receive the same response, because in real time, what we will find out, it has already assimilated that and is able to provide a new response, which is more in line with what that update I have made to my document. And that is really the big difference between using a chat with your PDF type solution versus making a direct integration into a knowledge repository like Notion. So as you can see here, the 8th item has been added, and this allows you to have a dynamic knowledge base, and your chatbot having access to a dynamic knowledge base allows you to scale much more easily and makes it much easier to maintain. Because if you had to do this with a PDF type solution, you'd have to re-upload that PDF file every single time you needed to make a change to your document, and that is not quite efficient. So this is a really amazing solution for those dynamic knowledge databases. Let's jump in and see exactly how to build this out. All right, so to get started, here are the things that we need to do. First, we need to set up our Slack application. We need to create a Notion integration application. We need to connect our Notion integration to the page that we want to read from. We need to write a function to obtain information about the page itself, retrieve the blocks, things of that nature. And then finally, we're going to write our OpenAI function, which is going to retrieve the information from the page and synthesize it into a response. We'll mix all of that together into our Slack application, and we should have our chatbot going. All right, so let's start by creating our Slack application. Now, to create our Slack application, we need to go to api.slack.com/apps, and we need to hit this create new app button. Now, we're going to be creating our Slack app using the app manifest style, and I'm going to be dropping that app manifest information in the GitHub repository attached to the description of this video. So let me just go ahead and select a workspace here. So I'm going to select Prompt Circle Academy. I'm going to go ahead and hit the next button, and we can see that we have a manifest that is sort of a placeholder manifest here. And I'm just going to paste in my actual manifest, and this just contains information about the app, including a name, description, things of that nature. It also includes some of the bot events and things of that nature that we're going to be using. We're running our app in socket mode, so it's enabled and set to true. So next up, all we're going to do is hit the next button, and we already have our bot scopes all figured out. So now we can go ahead and hit the create button. So once the create button is hit, our app is now ready to be installed, but we need to do a few things first. Now, first and foremost, we need to get the tokens, and the very first token I think we need to get, and actually before we get the tokens, I want to allow users to send / commands and messages. So this would allow us to interact with our bot directly from DMs. So that's the first thing I'm doing here. Next up, I want to go and create an app token. Now, to create an app token, you want to go to the app level tokens and generate token and scopes. And I'm going to call this app token. And here we're going to add the connections right token. So that's what we need for our socket mode. And we're going to go ahead and generate this. Now, please copy this and keep it somewhere safe, as you're going to be using it in your app as well. All right, so once we're done with that, we can hit the done button. Now, next up, we're just going to go ahead and actually install our application. To do that, you can go to OAuth and permissions and go to OAuth tokens for your workspace, because we want to basically obtain the token. So that's where we're installing it in the first place. So we're going to go ahead and install to workspace, and this is for Prompt Circle Academy, so it's looking good. And all I have to do is hit the allow button, and this would allow us to generate our bot user token. So again, copy your bot user token and keep it somewhere safe, because we're going to be using it in our app as well. So that's it for setting up your Slack application. Your Slack application is ready to go. Next up, let's go ahead and set up Notion. All right, so let's go ahead and create our Notion integration application. So to do that, all we really need to do is hit the new integration button. By the way, we are on notion.so/my-integrations. And what we need to do here is to set the workspace. So we already have a workspace. Now I'm going to just add a name for this bot. So I'm just going to give it Notion Knowledge Bot. And you can add a logo if you want, but you can just go ahead and really submit this, and that's it. Your application is created in Notion. And now you want to go ahead and copy your internal integration secrets, because you're going to need this. So I'm just going to copy it and keep it somewhere safe, because we're going to be using this in our application. And that's really it. That's how simple it is to create a Notion application. Now, keep in mind, you can also go check the capabilities. Here we have the ability to read content, update content, and insert content. So now let's go ahead and connect this particular application to the page that we want to read. All right, so let's go ahead and add the integration to our page. So we have a page here. This page contains my scripts for a course I created on building large language powered Slack chatbots. And what I'm going to do is basically go to these 3 dots here and scroll all the way down, and you see where it says add connection. Now, when you go to add connection, you can see that we have our application here. So this is called the Notion Knowledge Bot, and we can just simply add that application. And once we confirm that, this means that our application now has access to this page. And next, we're going to go ahead and write the function that is going to allow us to query Notion, return that information, and use that with the LLM to answer questions that come in from Slack. All right, so now the final thing you need from your Notion page is going to be your Notion page ID. So in this case, it's going to be this very last digit that you see in the URL of your Notion page. This basically is your Notion page ID. So you'll be needing that, and I'm just going to be copying that and putting it somewhere safe because we're going to need that for our application as well. All right, so now the final thing you need from your Notion page is going to be your Notion page ID. So in this case, it's going to be this very last digit that you see in the URL of your Notion page. This basically is your Notion page ID. So you'll be needing that, and I'm just going to be copying that and putting it somewhere safe because we're going to need that for our application as well. All right, so let's start by setting up our development environment. So go straight into your terminal and perform the following steps. You can pause the video so you can go through these one after the other. They're pretty straightforward. Create a directory, cd into the directory, create a virtual environment, and here are the environment variables you're going to be using. You can either export them to an environment variable, or you can just create a .env file and paste all of the values there. All right, so here we are in our development environment in VS Code, and we're going to do a few more things. So as you can see, I already have my environment variables inside my .env file. Now we're going to go ahead and install all the libraries that we need. So in this case, we need our OpenAI library to access OpenAI and GPT-4 or 3.5 as the case may be. We also have our request library to call the Notion API. We have our python.env to access our environment variables. And then we also have our Slack bot for our Slack application. So I'm just going to go ahead and install all of this. So now we have all of our libraries installed. So let's proceed to creating an app. So here I'm going to create a new file called app.py. And in here, we're going to actually paste our code. Now, I have gone ahead and written the code out, and I'm just going to step through it to show you exactly what's going on. So I'm going to paste the entire thing here and take you through it one step at a time. So starting here, you see our imports. So it comes as no surprise to you that we're importing requests, importing our .env file, importing OS to access variables. We're also importing OpenAI as well as our Slack bot and our socket mode handler because we're going to be operating in socket mode. So first and foremost, we're going to be highlighting, so I'm just going to zoom in here. We're going to highlight our environment variables. We're going to load them up. So that includes our page ID as well as our OpenAI API key. So those are the two variables that we're loading in here. Next up, we're going to go ahead and call, I'm just going to reduce this a little bit. We're just going to go ahead and create a function that is able to retrieve information from Notion. Now, the way Notion works is that you do have what the concept of a page, and within that page there are blocks in the page. So that block can be a header, it can be the paragraph, it can be a code block, things of that nature. So every single piece of information inside your Notion is actually a block. So what we're going to do is basically retrieve all the children blocks within a Notion page by its ID. And then we're going to loop through that, extract the content from that, and use that content as context for our API, our OpenAI API calls. So the very first thing we're going to do here is that we're going to use our Notion API key. So we're going to retrieve that API key. Next up, we're going to use the URL. So the URL for accessing the blocks within a page is this particular URL. So it is the /blocks page ID children. So A page is also a block in itself, so that's why we're using the slash blocks. So this is slash blocks. This is supposed to be called block ID because basically it's a block ID, but because a page is also a block, we're retrieving the children of the page block, and that's what this particular API endpoint is all about. So here we're just passing the headers in, we're passing an API key, and then we're using the Notion version 2022-0628. And then we're starting by initializing all the blocks that we need to get. Now, with Notion, they return a certain page size, and then they provide you with some pagination. So what we're doing here essentially is looping through the entire page and then using the next cursor to retrieve the next page to paginate all the way to the end so that we can get the full page. So that's essentially what this particular condition is here to do. So while true, we're just basically making those calls to use the page size and loop through the entire page size and go through the next cursor every time to return the information that is needed. So once we return all of that information, as you can see here, we get all the blocks, then we need to parse that information and return all of the blocks. So basically we loop through it, we get the results in from each of the blocks, and then we want to store that inside our all blocks. So when we store it in our all blocks, this means that this is all the block of information that we need. But that is not the end. Each block contains text information that is relevant to what we need. So each block will contain some kind of information, but what we really want to do is to obtain the actual text in each of these blocks. And that is what we're going to be doing in this next function. So we're extracting documents from the blocks. And when I say documents, I mean text essentially. So what we're going to do is that from our blocks, so we're going to set documents. So we're going to be creating like a list of strings containing text content from those blocks. So we're going to loop through all the blocks. So we're going to go through all the blocks, we're going to loop through them. Now we're going to be doing some checks here because there are different types of blocks when it comes to Notion. There are paragraphs, there are headings, there are code snippets, there are numbered list items, and so on and so forth. Now in your case, you might have to kind of look at what type of block you're trying to extract information from and create the necessary conditionals to be able to obtain the right information from them. So in our case, typically most of the content is added into a rich text. So each block type has a value called the rich text. So when you get the rich text, basically that is where the content is going to be. So you're basically going to take all of that information, obtain it from the rich text, and save that inside your text content. So again, we're going to basically get all the rich text and then append them into our documents list. So this gives us the full list of array of strings or information that is coming from those rich texts, which has been stored inside our documents. Now for code blocks specifically, because my content contains some code snippets and I don't want to miss out on those. I want that to be part of the context that I'm passing to OpenAI when I am making my calls. So as a result, I am creating a different conditional for code blocks specifically. So for code blocks, we're going to get the code. Now inside the code is also rich text. So the code is still represented in rich text. So we're going to get the rich text, and that rich text is what where we're going to find the actual content that is needed for our documents. So again, we're going to append all the code content inside the documents. Now, once we have all of that information, we return our documents, and now we have the information that we need. So we went through by first querying the blocks to get all the block children. We receive from the block children, we're now extracting the content, the text content from each block, and then we're saving them as documents. You might be familiar with this if you've used LangChain, because they use a concept of documents as well. So basically we're doing this a similar thing to what you might get to do if you were using, say, the LangChain API chain or something of that nature. All right, so next up, now that we have our documents, we now need to write a query that uses OpenAI GPT to pass in this query, whatever query it might be. So our query could be something like, what is this course all about? Or explain to me something really specific about a particular topic in that particular document. So what we're doing basically is that we're going to be creating this function that is going to be interacting with OpenAI GPT, right? So we're passing documents. So document represents all of that documents that we've written from Notion, and your user query is basically a question that you're passing through to OpenAI. Now, so typically when you're creating an OpenAI function, one thing that you need is a system message. And by the way, context basically is something that we're going to be using in our prompt, and you see it very, very shortly. So we're basically taking all the documents, we're basically combining all of these strings of documents, joining it into one blob of text, which we're going to be passing into our prompt. So here we have our system message, which contains the context that we're going to be passing through. So in our system message, as you know, with OpenAI, when you're using the chat completion endpoint, or in this case function, you will need a system message and you also need a user message. In our system message, we're entering our prompt. So I'm going to walk you through this prompt because this is really important. The prompt is everything. The prompt is actually programming language for using large language models, as you know. So let's go through the exact prompt that is going to allow us to use our knowledge documents that we've obtained as context to answer questions. So here we say, you are a helpful assistant who will answer questions based on a document containing information about a course. It includes video narrations and explanations of concepts and code snippets. Use Slack Markdown to return information, especially around headings, and I should correct the spelling here, around headings, code blocks, bullet points, as well as using bold and italics where necessary, add emojis where necessary. You will use the context provided below from this document to answer accurate questions. In scenarios where code is not clean for code snippet, format accordingly. And we're passing in the context, right, which is going to use to answer questions. And then we put a response section. So this prompt, as you can see, one is explaining to it that the content we're dealing with is a course. We're telling it that it has video narrations, it has explanations, it has concepts, it has code snippets. And because we're using this in Slack, we're saying return the information you're sending back to us in Slack Markdown. So that means that when we request for things like code snippets, we're trying to make sure that it's coming back as a code snippet rather than coming in just as text, which might be very difficult to read when you have it. And we explain to it all the various things that it needs to be thinking about just to make sure that the information it's returning is provided in the right format. So that's our system message. So that is our prompt. We've written our prompt, we've told it what we need to do. We've also passed in the context, because for every prompt that is rooted in real world data, you want to pass in a context. So we've passed in that context. Now, next up, we're going to now pass in our user query. So our user query could be something like, explain to me X, or explain to me Y, or explain to me what this course says about this, or what it says about that. So this is what your user is going to be providing as a query, and that is going to be stored under the user message, under the role user, and the content is what you're passing here. So now we have stipulated those. Now we can create our actual API call to OpenAI. We're using the library here, so it's not necessarily an API call, but you get what I mean. So here we say response equals to OpenAI chat completion.create. So we're using the chat completion function here, or method here, and then we're passing in some key information. First, we want to pass in the model. So we're going to be using GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K0613. Now, the reason I'm using this is because it has a very long context window or token size, which allows you to put in as much context. My course is a very large course, so I wanted to be able to pass in the entire thing into its context window without any issues. So 16K means that it's 16,000 tokens that you can pass in, which is a ton of information that you can pass in. So that's why I'm using this. You can also use GPT-4, you can use any other system. And also we've found that GPT 3.5 is quite fast as well. But always keep in mind that the token size is very important. So always keep that in mind when you're deciding which model to use, to make sure that you're not hitting token limit errors when you run your system. The next thing we're passing in is those messages we just created. So the system message, which contains our prompt and our context, and then the user message, which is basically the query that we're going to be providing. We're always setting our temperature to 0. I've added in the max tokens here, but it doesn't really matter. I think it typically kind of happens almost automatically the way it determines how to use tokens, so that's fine. And usually the max tokens, I think, are referring back to tokens that are used for the output. And those are the main attributes that are required here. Now we can go ahead and provide what the response is going to look like. So the response is usually contained inside the body of this payload, choices, the very first item in choices, and you're going to look for message content. So typically that's where the information is going to be. Now I also wanted to come back as a formatted reply. So I just want to answer, provide an answer and then provide the reply itself. I want it to be coming back as a JSON response that looks like this. So this is what this function is going to be returning. Now let's go ahead and see it in use. So let's go ahead and create our Slack application. Just initialize our Slack to make sure that we can run this function, retrieve the information we need, and then start using it inside Slack. So as usual, if you've been following my channel, you know the drill already with setting up Slack. So first and foremost, you want to initialize Slack by creating the app and setting the Slack app by passing in your Slack bot token. And then here we're creating an event handler. So our event here is just app.message. So any message that is received, any direct message that is received by our chatbot is going to be handled with this particular function. So I have this message hello function here that I'm using. So here you can pass in your client, message, and say. So these are what we're going to be using. Client allows us to use the Slack API. So you're going to see very shortly when we use the client.post message to send messages. We can also use it to make other API calls. Message is where our event is contained. So all of the event payload is going to be there. And say typically is a very quick way to respond back. Whenever you respond back to the event very quickly. So it's a function that is typically on the Slack bot that you use. So first and foremost, we want to capture our channel ID because we want to send the message back into that channel. And we also want to know who the user is. So we're going to capture the user ID as well. So the very first thing we want to do is that whenever we receive an event, we want to store that event's TS. So TS represents timestamp. We want to store it, but first thing we want to do is that we want to say we want to respond back to that message. So the very first thing we do is that we say working on it. So this just simply means that we're just replying immediately that we're working on it, because it's going to take a little bit of time for OpenAI to run those things, for Notion to return the information. So we don't want the user thinking that, oh, it's taking a long time without having any feedback. So we're immediately sending the message saying we're working on it. Next up, we're passing in the channel ID of the channel where it's coming from, and then the thread underscore TS. This is where we have we're threading the message. So we're not just sending the message, we're threading it as well. So the thread TS is taking the timestamp of the message and passing that in so that the reply that we send is threaded, and that is very important. Next thing that we want to do and the reason it's important is just makes your your messaging a little bit cleaner, makes your bot respond in a clean manner. All right, next thing we want to do is that we want to get the documents, and so the first thing we're going to be calling our initial function where we had gotten our page blocks from Notion. We're going to be getting the documents as well using the second function we looked at, which is extracting documents from a block. And then we're going to be passing in the user query. The user query in this sense is going to be the message that the user has sent in Slack. And then we're going to be also providing an answer. Now, our answer is basically using the third function we looked at, which is our OpenAI function, and it's going to be passing documents and the user query in there. Now, once we get our answer, we're going to pass that answer. So we're going to get the answer from our request. So remember when we had like an answer value in our payload, so we're going to be retrieving that answer, and if there is no answer available, we're going to reply with no answer available. So now once we return that information from OpenAI, we want to update that message, that initial message, and I'll show you this once we kind of run this application. We don't want to just have it walking on it there. We just want to update that message to the answer that you have found. So to do that, we're going to be extracting our channel ID. We're going to be using the TS function. So we're using a chat.update. And so these are the things that you typically need to pass. Your TS, which is your message timestamp, the text we're using to respond, and then the thread that we're using. So this is thread TS. This just basically means that the message needs to still be in the same thread. Now to start our app, we just use the if name equal to main, and we pass in our socket mode handler where we're passing in our app. And we're passing in the Slack app token which we had created, and we're doing a .start to run that function. So that's all we really need to do to get our app done. So now we can go ahead and do a Python app.py, and this should start our app. So we see here our app is running. So let's go ahead and test it out. Right, so let's go ahead and see our app in action. So here I'm opening up our Notion knowledge bot, and we're going to the messages section. I'm going to be asking, and let's start with a very, very simple question. Let's just say, what is this course all about? So let's start with that one. What is this course all about? So we'll start with that. Now, what you notice here is immediately it does provide me with my working on it. So that initial message that we use to respond back to say, we're working on it. And then you can see the update has also happened. This course is about building AI applications in Slack. It focuses on leveraging the power of Slack's conversational interface and integrating AI models to create various types of AI applications, which is awesome. So now I can actually go ahead and ask another question. So maybe I want to ask, show me the code snippet for building an LLM chain application. So let's try that. Now this time around, again, we see it's working on it, and now I'm expecting it to show me a code snippet, which should be in a code block based on the instructions that we gave it. And as you can see, as we expected, it returns it in a code block, and it actually went in and pulled in the information right from inside that course and is returning back the response back. So here you have it. You can connect your knowledge database in real time. I think that's the cool thing about this. This is in real time. So if I made an update to that document, to my Notion page, that will be reflected here. And that is a big change from using just a chat with PDF type application, which is what is most common right now. But moving away from that and being able to obtain dynamic data is very powerful. As you can see here, I would love to see what you build, what type of applications, what type of chatbots you're building with your Notion connections. I think it's going to be really helpful for things like, internal help desks, external help desks, if you want to, create those as well, FAQ channels, things of that nature. I think it can be really, really powerful around that. Also around research, studying, and things of that nature. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you love these type of videos, feel free to subscribe, and talk to you next time. Thank you.